So, dear sisters and brothers, the salt of the earth has always intrigued me. To be honest, I never really understood what it meant. As a young boy, I wondered why the combination of salt and earth functioned as an example of the vocation of Christians. I found it difficult to combine the different elements of the metaphor. To me, salt was not a fertilizer at all. I saw people use salt to do exactly the opposite. When there were weeds in the front yard, on the sidewalk, or between the paving stones, salt was dragged in to help remove what nature had naturally produced. Salt was an enemy of plants, not a fertilizer of the soil. Later on, I learned that in order for the soil to be fruitful, it needed minerals, and thus a balanced amount of salt, or a certain degree of saltiness at least. At the same time, I was aware that Jesus is not teaching agriculture, let alone a lesson about how to optimally use chemicals to make the earth as productive as possible. I stayed puzzled about the meaning of salt of the earth as a theology student. We learned great things about the Sermon on the Mount and about the cultures of the ancient Near East, about which you needed to know some basics to make sense of the contents of the Bible. We learned about the importance of cultural backgrounds and cultural differences, about how language matters, and about the ingenious rhetoric of the evangelists. Matthew was a special case, in particular because of the speeches of Jesus, which arguably constitute the core of his gospel. And among those speeches, the Sermon on the Mount holds primacy of place. That was the textual horizon against which to situate the Lord's Prayer, the Beatitudes, the Golden Rule, etc. In addition, it was the core of Jesus' preaching about justice, mercy, and the kingdom of heaven. Yet, all these insights, regardless how valuable they are, how valuable they were to me, they did not aid me to grasp the real meaning of salt of the earth. So I let go. I trusted that if someone asked me the meaning of those words, I could tell enough historical, theological, and spiritual generalities to shed enough light on it, to shed enough light on this obscurity in order to expel it. I could refer to the use of ovens in antique Judaism, where the inside surface of those ovens was treated with salt, because not wood, but manure was used as fuel, and that salt easily became impure and lost its power. Or I could refer to the well-known potential of salt to preserve food and to protect it from decay in the age before the fridges, or to the curious culinary effect of salt to strengthen the taste of herbs and spices in all kinds of dishes, or to the region of the Dead Sea, where most salt for the use of households in Jesus' culture and time came from. Nevertheless, the obscurity for myself remained. It was only when I started preaching on a regular basis, that must have been some 15 years ago, and when through this commitment, my own life of prayer was slowly transformed and deepened, that I realized that in order to find a solution for my problem, I actually needed to apply an insight that I had gradually learned. That insight may serve as a key to unlock the door to the real meaning of salt of the earth, but also to that of light of the nations, the city on the top of the hill, and the relation between the law and its fulfillment, all elements of the gospel text we've just heard. This key is the following. Jesus came to rewire the electric system of creation. Creation was not the problem, and the salvation he embodied was of course not alien to creation. Salvation does not come on top of creation, but through it, in it, with him. Jesus came to show again the radicalness of what God wants, the depth of love, the real life consequences of justice and mercy in his name, the true meaning of the kingdom. Jesus actually did nothing more, but also nothing less, than manifesting the primacy of God in one's life. He demonstrated the truth and order encapsulated by the 10 Commandments. First, recognize God, worship God and only God, and all the rest comes along with it. That order is never easy for humanity. Time and again, there are reasons to modify, freely reinterpret, reorder, amend, question, and even undermine God's order. And many times, these reasons are not bad reasons. They are understandable, common sense, even reasonable, perceived necessary, or indispensable. It is only time which teaches that every time it was above all human benefit, opportunism, and logics of commodification which prevailed. The time to realize that in the end, this was not the right thing to do because the consequences were destruction, injustice, oppression, etc. That is the time of Jesus. Jesus is God's appeal, but not only moral pressure. Jesus is God's standing invitation that all things can be made new again and grafted on creation and aligned with salvation. Jesus is realizing our participation in God, which is moreover the profound meaning of his ascension into heaven. We are like the men of Galilee, staring at the sky, desiring to follow him, but bound to our role here on earth. This reading key, Jesus as embodying, remembering, universalizing, and at the same time radicalizing God's message to the people of Israel, helps us comprehend what it means that he urges his followers right after the Beatitudes to be salt of the earth. For of course, how could it not be the case? It is the Old Testament which resonates here. Salt makes the hearers of Matthew's gospel think of the covenant. Here is a foundational verse from the Pentateuch. You shall not omit from your grain offerings of the salt of the covenant with your God. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. Leviticus 2:13. Clearly, salt is used within the symbolic framework of the relation between Israel and God. Salt seems an indispensable ingredient of any offering. This undoubtedly reinforces the agricultural meaning and universal importance of salt for maintaining the goods of the earth. Salt is thus associated with the idea of keeping something, of cherishing something, of taking care of something, of reassurance, of trust, fides, faith. This quoted verse from the Torah significantly resounds in a story about one of the so many battles of Israel with its neighbors. I quote from 2 Chronicles. Abijah engaged in battle, having an army of valiant warriors, 400,000 picket men. And Jeroboam drew up his line of battle against him with 800,000 picket mighty warriors. Then Abijah stood on the slope of Mount Zeramaim, that is in the hill country of Ephraim, and said, "Listen to me, Jeroboam and Israel. Do you not know that the Lord of Israel gave the kingship over Israel forever to David and his sons by a covenant of salt?" In other words, in the midst of a situation of enmity and tension, reference is made to salt being a strong and trustworthy symbol of loyalty. Not the kind of loyalty that is the result of human interests and negotiations, but the ultimate loyalty, God's covenant. Another very powerful remembrance of this idea of salt is found in the prophet Ezekiel. Like Leviticus, salt is connected to offering and sacrifice. I quote, "On the second day, you shall offer a male goat without blemish for a sin offering. And the altar shall be purified as it was purified with the bull. When you have finished purifying it, you shall offer a bull without blemish and a ram from the flock without blemish. You shall present them before the Lord, and the priests shall throw salt on them and offer them as a burnt offering to the Lord." Chapter 43, verses 22 to 24. Again, salt is connected to preservation in the sense of a necessary ingredient to keep things pure. Let us now, with this knowledge that comes from the Old Testament, return to Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, literally the Greek says when it has turned mad, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. It is critical to remind that this verse, where the salt is mentioned, follows immediately after the Beatitudes. 8 times there is a sentence beginning with "blessed are," and those have been at the center of your reflections of last week, if I'm well informed. Then comes an intermediate verse where, grammatically speaking, the focus shifts from "blessed are" in the third person plural to the admonition "rejoice and be glad" in verse 12, which is continued to address this in the second person plural, "your reward is great in heaven." But this is not an automatism. Jesus would not have to teach and to instruct if this were already evident, or at the very least, if it were already sufficiently clear. It needs to be repeated. It needs to be reinforced. It needs to be shown time and again by sons of God, holy persons who share and borrow their holiness from the Lord. Our verse about the salt of the earth is the first one with the direct address, "You are," immediately after the Beatitudes. This particular position implies that we have to devote special attention to it. We now know that salt is to be related first and foremost to the covenant with God. And we also know that Jesus' role is to reinvigorate that covenant so as to make sure that the flow of God's graces is no longer impeded. In other words, that his words of liberation and his word of life, his life, are smoothly integrated into our existence. On close inspection, Jesus' whole speech is circling around that fundamental thrust. It entails that followers of Jesus who are permeated and who let themselves be permeated by the content of the Beatitudes and thus set them forth in their own lives and destinies, do not only do this because they are inspired by a particular master who speaks engaging words of wisdom, but that they do it to continue the covenant with God in a new way. That is at once what it means to be light of the world or light of the nations, Lumen Gentium, which is not only the title of one of the most important documents issuing forth from the Second Vatican Council, which for me, as a Roman Catholic Christian, holds particular importance up to the present day, but which also echoes prophetic sayings from Isaiah. This reference to Isaiah from the Gospel of Matthew corresponds with the same logic as the one I laid bare with respect to Ezekiel and to Chronicles and the salt. Christians, or any follower of Jesus, have to interiorize an uncompromising love for God. I regularly challenge my students when I straightforwardly contend and provoke them, actually undermining the very presuppositions of the catechetical model in which most of them were raised, that Christians are primarily God seekers, not Jesus imitators. After all, Jesus himself in the gospel persistently refers to his Father, whom he can intimately address, and we through him, with him, and in him, as Abba. The logic I have pointed at concerning the salt of the earth and the light of the world is identical with the one which clarifies and illuminates the relation between law and Christ. I quote from our gospel of today, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished." Dear sisters and brothers, I wholeheartedly wish that we open ourselves for the truth, beauty, and goodness of these words, that we let them enter into our minds and bodies and societies, that we are inspired by them and set them forth in our prayers and commitments. I hope that we are thrilled by Jesus' exhortation to truly become salt of the earth, not ruin what we consider weed, but to give bones, legs, arms, and hands to God's unbreakable covenant. Amen.